Okay, so it's a book, like Mr. Folayo mentioned, written a while ago, then reviewed recently. John Kotter and another gentleman who, I don't want to murder his name, but something like Rat Beggar. But the focus of the book is about changing and succeeding under any conditions. The title, The Iceberg is Melting, is actually set in Antarctica. That's up where it's very cold, and there are penguins there, and things are happening. We can model it to ourselves because wherever you are in the world, things are changing at an alarming rate on an almost daily basis. I mean, 2020 to date, COVID and all has brought so many changes on us. So let me just jump straight into the book review. All right, so the book is written in a story style. So those of us who like cartoons like myself, you will enjoy it. You have penguins. And the central theme of the book is you have penguins that are living on a colony. They've been there for a while, but this iceberg on which they live is melting. So the book tells us how to deal well under stress and the uncertainty of rapid change. There are 5 main characters in the book: Fred, Alice, Louis, Buddy the professor, and No. And all of them are used to illustrate John Kotter's 8 steps for producing successful organizational change. By the way, John Kotter wrote a book before this that talks about 8 steps for organizational change, and we'll look at them. So what are these steps? Number 1, it says we need to create a sense of urgency. 2, you have to pull together a guiding team. 3, you need to develop the vision and the strategy for the change. Then you must communicate this for understanding and for people to buy in. Number 5, you have to empower people to act. Number 6, very important, you must celebrate and produce short-term wins. Number 7, you don't let up. That means you don't become complacent. And number 8, you must create a new culture. So as we go through the story, I will just highlight each of the steps. Now, interestingly, John Kotter and Ralph have done something. They've actually broken these steps into stages. And I'd just like to show there are 4 stages. The first stage is set the stage, forgive the tautology. And it has 2 steps there, 1 and 2. Then the second stage is to decide what to do. And it has just 1 step there, develop the change, vision, and strategy. Then the third step has quite a bit to do, make it happen. That's where the work happens. So you have steps 4 to 7. And then the last stage is really, where you create a new culture, and that's where it ends. That's, step number 8. Okay, so let's go into the story. Like I said, I enjoyed it because I actually love cartoons, and it has very, comical characters there. So the setting is you have a colony of 268 penguins somewhere in the Antarctica near Cape Washington. And they've lived on this iceberg for years, and they all depend on themselves. And because of that, they all probably reason, think the same way, have the same biases, etc. Now, among these penguins, there was one called Fred, who was a little bit different. Why? He was somebody who was both curious and observant, and that's a very interesting mix, curiosity and observant. And I'd like to make a note here that in our teams, we should intentionally encourage diversity, because as we go along, we discover that if not for Fred, these guys would have been destroyed or non-existent. So his nature, ask questions, observe, ask questions, observe. And because of that, he noticed something which others didn't notice. That is that the iceberg they were living on was melting, and that it might break apart. If it breaks apart, they are all going to be destroyed. Initially, he didn't want to pass information on to anyone. He felt, I'm not a leader, I don't belong to the group or the clique. But he finally summoned up courage and spoke to Alice. Alice is a member of the leadership colony. She's somebody who had the quality of being open to listen to ideas. And she took his idea to the leadership team. They have a leadership team in the colony of about 5 people headed by Louis. And one of the things I must note is that, Fred, part of why he was initially afraid was he remembered earlier, somebody had brought up something and the person was ostracized. So I want to encourage us that we should not ostracize minority opinions in our teams. They just might save the day for us. So he walks up to Alice, he tells her, she initially doesn't take him seriously, but for whatever it's worth, they take a tour together of the iceberg, and he shows her what could possibly happen, and she realizes that, wow, this is serious. So she decides in turn to escalate the matter to the head penguin, that's Louis. And then Fred is invited to make a presentation to the leadership council. Expectedly, his hypothesis was met with resistance and skepticism, but he was able to convince them, using a bottle as a model. So he explained the theory of water getting frozen, expanding and all. And they kept the bottle there overnight. And when they came the next morning, the bottle was broken. That showed them that this could possibly happen to their own iceberg. And my note there is that we must find unique ways to communicate our messages. So at this stage, Louis, as the head of the colony, realizes, I can't do this on my own. This is serious. And he decides to set up a change management team. So it's important that we get teams. Now, when Fred had finished the presentation and people had asked questions just in the committee, the mode and the mood changed. People realized that, wow, there's a problem here. And so that takes us to step one of the model. You have to create a sense of urgency. We're talking about change, steps for change, create a sense of urgency. At this stage, Fred realizes, Louis realizes he can't do this job on his own. So he decides to set up a change management committee, which of course includes Fred, Alice, who listened to him, himself, and a professor and somebody else body. Initially, they were going in different ways. He did one or two things to make them come together so that they will be, focused on one objective. And that takes us straight away to step two. You have to pull together the guiding team, because if the team is singing divergent tunes, then you won't get results. And we must also note that each member of the team has unique and complementary qualities. I generally believe that in a team, you should have people who complement the weaknesses of others, so you have strength in the team. And if we look at it, this is what, the observation is. Louis is the leader. He's wise, patient, respected. Alice, member of the leadership colony, but she's practical, aggressive, and likes getting things done. Buddy is handsome. People trust him. Fred, mentioned, he's a young, curious guy, and the professor is logical and well-read. So that's how they put their team together. So it's important that you pull your team together. Now that the team is set together, they also find out that they need to engage, people, find out if there are other ideas that people have with regards to what they need to do. The bottom line is that their iceberg is melting. This is where they've lived for a while, and if they don't leave the place, they might just not be in existence anymore. So as expected, when things like this happen, number of ideas started coming up. Many of the ideas were not practicable, but somebody suggested that, Fred brought this idea, and it's because he's always wandering over the place, observing. Why don't we just take a walk? So as they took a walk in the team, and Fred, as usual, was looking around, and he looked up and he sees a seagull, and he begins to say, oh, that's the answer. And I want us to take note of things here. This tip that produced the breakthrough doesn't seem to make sense. So when you're looking for solutions to problems, I suggest that you have an open mind. And what happened? The seagull provided the inspiration they needed. How? It's not an animal that's normally found in the cold Antarctica where they were. So the question is, what are you doing here, seagull? They engaged the seagull, began to ask questions until the seagull felt cold and had to fly away. And they discovered that, so this seagull has come ahead of the rest of the seagulls as a scout. The job of the seagull was to discover a suitable place for the seagulls to perch for a while. And at that point, it occurred to them that, well, maybe they can do the same thing. This was the aha moment. For penguins that had been in the same place for a long time, they considered the seagulls to be nomadic. But it occurred to them, because they had to do something that if they also copied that idea, there's nothing wrong with calibrating the competition. They could also send out scouts to go and look for another suitable location, another iceberg where they could stay. And this was the vision they needed. When we have problems, we need to have that aha moment or a vision, a possibility. Otherwise, the tendency is for us to stay stuck in the mud. So once they had the vision, very quickly they moved to step 3, which is develop that change vision and a strategy for it. So now they escalate to Louis, and Louis, as a head penguin, has to tell the rest of the colony that this is what's up. Expected, I'm sure some of us can relate to this. The professor developed a 97-page PowerPoint presentation, slides, but by the time they did a review, they discovered that before you get to slide 10, people will be lost. So instead, Louis decided to engage in talk and response method of dialogue with all of the penguins. And in this, mode, he was able to sell the idea to the penguins that they are not stuck to this particular iceberg and they can move on and they will move on. So now that people have caught the interest, he hands over to Buddy, another member of the change team, who then communicates what Fred had told them and then goes ahead to tell them the new vision, how they would move from, place to place. Of course, there were a lot of questions. Of course, as is usual, when there's something new, maybe 50% of you will catch it immediately. And at the end, even after talking back and forth, you probably will still have about 70%, max 80. And there's a 20 who still didn't catch on to the idea. But with the momentum they had, they decided that, look, we have to move on to step 4, which is communicate for understanding and buy-in. And this is important for us as leaders, especially when we want to lead change. You can do it on your own. And if you don't get the buy-in of people, at least a significant number, you might not be able to achieve anything. So the step 4, which is part of stage 3, make it happen, like I mentioned earlier, had quite a bit. It wasn't without its challenges. There were people that were dissenting voices, and there were interesting incidents, including the children penguins having nightmares. Now, how did that happen? There was a teacher penguin who was anxious about this whole moving, and in her passing on the message to the children penguins, actually created fear. So they were having nightmares. Fortunately, one of the team members, Buddy, asking around, and he ended up talking to her, and at that point was able to discover her anxieties. And then it actually switched the thing around, allayed her fears, and then she began to tell a different narrative to those children, and they stopped having nightmares. Of course, when children have nightmares, the parents too became anxious. There was also a problem of how do you feed scouts, because they had a tradition that everybody eats from their own pot, so to speak. Now, if you want people to go out as scouts to look for a new location, the challenge is how will they eat when they come back? So, these were issues that came up. But part of what I like that happened there was after Buddy engaged the teacher and passed the message on to the rest of the colony, that's the leadership colony, that, well, this is what happened. This is why the children are having nightmares. Alice was approached by one of the children, and as the child kept asking Alice questions, Alice just offhand said, well, this is what I'd like for you to do. And the child picked up that idea, and this whole thing about having a tribute to our Heroes Day, a function, came up. And so the children started working on it. And the event was an innovative way of engaging parents as well as the children penguin. So they moved on to step 5. And step 5 is empower others. You have to get people engaged and involved in things. There was a challenge I mentioned earlier, I'd like to highlight now, of a culture they had that everybody has to feed his or her own children and himself. Now, if you ask people to go out as penguins, to go and scout for new locations, they won't have time to fish. When they come back, they'll be hungry. How will they eat? And so part of the innovation was the event that was going to be called the Tribute to Heroes Day would have an admission fee. The admission fee was 2 fish per adult. And so that meant that once the scouts are returning, they would have fish to eat. Of course, they had to break the culture of everybody eats with his or her own children, but it was an innovative way of sorting things out. Okay, truth be told, swimming into the Antarctic is not a stroll in the park. And there was anxiety about the fact that some of the scouts might not return, or if they return, they might be injured. So they made all the plans. Alice had a team set up if they were injured. But amazingly, everybody, all the scouts came back. Nobody was seriously hurt. And, they came into this, our Heroes Day celebration, and it was a great event, very great event. One of the things I picked from there is that even in the midst of challenge, you have to find a way to encourage yourself and prop up morale. Not only was it a great event, the child who initiated the idea of this Heroes Day celebration was given an award. The parents were proud. So, morale is up and everybody is like good to go. So with this, they moved on straight away to step 6, which is produce short-term wins. And I think this is very important because life is full of challenges, but it doesn't mean that everything is bad. There must be something good that you pick out, celebrate, and then motivate people to carry on. Now that they've had that change in mode, they've had this win, Louis, as the head of the leadership council, invites the scouts for a meeting, and the professor is also invited. Louis asked a lot of questions. The professor asked additional questions. At the end of the day, they discovered that, yes, there were possible locations they could go to, but they hadn't found the exact, suitable location. So now their job is streamlined. Go and get one single iceberg that we can relocate to. Awesome. Now, because of the success of the Heroes Day, a lot of people are now willing to volunteer. So by the time they're going for the second search, more people are volunteers as scouts. And they went out. And guess what? Fortunately, in the second search, a suitable iceberg was found. It was found just before the start of winter. And so the colony could move. That was a great achievement. Of course, the move wasn't without its own challenges. It was chaotic, but by and large, they got there. They settled in the new location. And I guess if you've ever moved house or office, you would understand some of the issues, new traffic routes, etc. So it did have its own problems. The fishing grounds were not in familiar places. There was wind bouncing off the walls of, the ice, but the problems were less than they anticipated. However, this is very interesting. The next season, the colony moved to another much more suitable iceberg. They moved again. And, having done it once, they were not afraid to do it again. So why did they move again? Even though it's tempting to argue that, with all the stress we have gone through in the first movement, we shouldn't move again. They moved again because they realized that they must not become complacent again. That's what happened the first time. And so they activated step 7. And step 7 is don't let up. Don't become complacent. Always be on the lookout and hungry for advantages you can take, changes you can use to your own benefit. Now, to bring it home, a lot of things happen in the process. And thankfully, Louis, as the head of the council, was observing and able to put things in perspective. One of the things that the colony now did was to introduce a topic, scouting, in the school curriculum. So penguins must know how to scout for new locations. Ultimately, Louis retired as the head penguin, and Alice, who had matured in the process of leading this change, took over. Louis made it a duty to share stories of the first move of the colony, and in doing that, he was intentionally passing on knowledge. Overall, this is really important. Everyone in the colony had grown less afraid of change. Sometimes it's just the whole concept of change that we're not familiar with. They just want to stay in our comfort zone. And so they had come to step 8, which was to create that culture that respects change. This is a picture of them in their new Iceberg location. Everybody is happy, honky-dory, but there was work involved. So that's like a summary of the book. And I think I try to make it in, I think just about 20, 22 minutes so that we can have enough time to ask questions. Like I said, it's a book I thoroughly enjoyed, possibly because I love change, and also the cartoon characters made it very attractive to me. Thank you.